Be sure to tune in next week for another of our variety show episodes with segments from Pastor Bennett and I started to call you Sergeant Bennett. I'm starting to mix the members of the cast together. You're interchangeable. I haven't had enough coffee.
The consequences of 170 episodes, huh?
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 170, and I'm joined once again by our good friend, Pastor John Bennett from St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Pastor, welcome back. Good grief. Has it been 170 episodes, really?
Well, it doesn't seem like it. Except for those times where we try to start recording and nothing goes right.
Then it seems like it's been like 450 episodes. Today we're going to be doing another round of crime in the Ten Commandments. We've chosen some recent news articles. Maybe not so recent. We don't know. It's all a surprise related to crime or self-defense, and we're going to discuss them and how the Ten Commandments apply to each story. But first, let's talk about some really awesome people. You, our listeners, and particularly those of you who support the show through your purchases at the Armed Lutheran Shop, or our affiliate partners like Dunkin' Donuts or Gun Mag Warehouse, and our beloved patrons who are members of the Reformation Gun Club. Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded radio, and that means no commercials, no financial commitments that might cloud or color our judgment or our product reviews, and no money. And that's where you come in, by supporting the show in one of the aforementioned ways. You make all of this possible. Check out the show notes for episode number 170, where we have links where you can support the show when you shop, or check out the Reformation Gun Club at armedlutheran.us/gun club and learn about all the cool benefits and the exclusive content available for members there. Thank you again for your support. All right, we're playing Ten Commandments or Crime in the Ten Commandments. I almost said Ten Commandments in the news. Pastor Gegline would kill me. Copyright violation. And the first story I picked out, Pastor, is from this year, April of 2019, and it's from right here in my backyard from Dallas County, from CBSDFW.com. Dallas County Criminal District Attorney John Creuzot, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who campaigned on criminal justice reform, has announced that he no longer plans to prosecute certain low-level crimes. His office is in the process of dropping many of those cases, and he's already dismissed more than 1,000 drug possession cases during his first 3 months in office. Shortly after being elected in November of 2018, Creuzot said, "On my agenda is not to ask judges to send people to the penitentiary for technical violations of their probation, for instance, not doing community service or not paying their fines or fees." In a letter to the people of Dallas County, Creuzot said that his office will no longer prosecute many first-time marijuana offenses or any drug possession cases involving less than 0.01 grams of a drug. Former Dallas County Prosecutor Judge Mike Snipes said he thinks it's forward-thinking. People who have minor offenses have a better chance of rehabilitating their life and getting back on track. Now, at this point, before I finish this article, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to work out the way they intended to.
Right? The road to hell is always paved with good intentions, right? And this sounds like it's well-intended, but...
Or in this case, the road to anarchy is paved with good intentions.
Right. So Creuzot said he will dismiss many criminal trespass cases as well. He will be the charges that he says are most often brought against the mentally ill and the homeless. And here's the ringer. He is also no longer going to prosecute theft cases involving personal items worth less than $750 unless evidence shows that it was for economic gain. But The president of the National Black Police Association, Sergeant Sheldon Smith, said that he worries it's going to lead to more crime. It opens the door for some people to think that they can commit crimes and get away with it, said Smith. Dallas County Sheriff Marion Brown told CBS 11 that her office will continue to enforce the laws as mandated by state legislation. So, this isn't the typical crime story that we cover, but the commandments play themselves out here in a way, in a really weird way, I think. The 9th and the 10th commandments play here because we talk about a lot about how everything with crime typically starts with covetousness. And while this isn't a direct violation, it sounds to me that this is essentially, if it's less than $750, it's going to be sanctioning covetousness, is it not?
Well, and sanctioning theft. I mean,
yes.
From now on, if I want a new phone, I'm just heading down to Dallas and seeing if anybody's left their phone in their car.
Right, exactly. As long as you're not selling it and making a profit off of it.
Right. No, officer, I was taking this for my personal use because my phone doesn't work right anymore.
Right. If I want that guy's gun, I'll just jump him after the gun show.
No. I was taking it for self-defense.
Well, that probably wouldn't work. I'd get arrested for the assault, but I'd have to find some way to sneak it out of his car or break into his car while he was, yeah. But as long as the gun's not, as long as it's a beater and less than $750, and so
1911 fanboys who were hoping to get a new 1911 are suddenly disappointed that the limit was set at $750.
Unless you want a Rock Island, I mean, you can steal one of those.
Funny thing though, I've owned a number of 1911s. I'm not quite the 1911 fanboy I was when I first became a gun owner, and of all the 1911s that I've owned, the ones that were most reliable were Rock Island Armory.
They make more 1911s than anybody in the world, I hear.
Yes.
So,
and they've been making them for a lot longer than most manufacturers, too. They've been making them since the 40s.
Yep, exactly. So, let's see. There's no sixth commandment. There's no fifth commandment here. There's no third or second. But
you could say that, here, I'm going to get way out in the weeds. You could extrapolate a sixth commandment issue with this.
Oh, dear Lord.
Bear with me here. Your local newsstand has pornographic magazines, and that pervert decides that he wants to get his rocks off, so he just decides to grab a couple of them and run. He's not going to get prosecuted.
It's right. It's not for economic gain.
Right. Unless he's got like a seriously weird fetish and puts more than $750 worth in his backpack before he goes.
Right. Is there a fourth commandment angle here? Because, the fourth commandment says that we should honor our father and our mother and all those in authority, but doesn't this encourage people to disobey the law? Won't it lead to people disrespecting those in authority?
Absolutely. I mean, theft is already illegal, and then we're saying that we really don't care about petty theft. And now here's the interesting point. This is not the first I've heard of this story. And of course, obviously, Dallas has learned nothing from what happened in New York City. Before Rudy Giuliani became mayor, they had this kind of a policy where petty theft went unpunished. Small misdemeanor crimes, they didn't bother investigating or prosecuting those. They said, well, we want to use all of our resources for the big crimes, the breaking and entering, the assault, the rape, that sort of thing. And crime was rampant, very rampant, when Rudy Giuliani took office in New York City. And then he changed the policies. And they started to investigate these petty crimes. And what they found out was that a lot of these little petty crimes, the criminals who were committing those petty crimes were also the ones committing the larger, more grievous crimes.
Right.
Who would have thought that criminals who, rape and murder and assault would also commit petty crime? Perish the thought. So when they started taking all crime seriously, crime statistics went down significantly.
Yep.
But we're Dallas, so it's we're going to get it right this time.
Yes, exactly. History repeating itself. And this also gets to the seventh, not just in the idea that it's sanctioning theft, but in Luther's explanation of the seventh commandment, doesn't he talks about protecting our neighbor's property. Doesn't this fail in that regard? Because it's not. It's basically the state saying we're not going to protect your property.
Right. And, if the police don't give a rip, then why should I?
Right.
Oh, I just saw somebody, going to my neighbor's house and taking out his less than $750 value television. Well, if they're not going to prosecute it, what's the point? I'm not going to get involved.
And one last, as all of them typically do, one last angle would be, as with all violations of the commandments, they're ultimately violations of the first. They're violations of the commandment to fear, love, and trust in God above all things. Does the DA's refusal to carry out his duties to fulfill his vocation violate the first commandment?
I would say so. I would say so because he is basically saying that I am God, more or less, in a civil sense. I get to decide what is and is not good and right and just. That, society says that these things are wrong. Mm-hmm. Common sense, human decency, everything in us tells us that these things are wrong. Decent law-abiding people aren't decent in law-abiding because of the law. They're decent in law-abiding because there is that conscience within them that tells them that certain things are not morally acceptable, such as,
right.
Beating your wife, breaking into your neighbor's home, stealing, that sort of thing. And if we're going to go ahead and say, well, these things don't matter, and God's law, not that, rape and assault and that thing, not that those don't matter, but that lesser crimes, the crimes that, Dallas suddenly is no longer going to prosecute. If these things don't matter, then where do we draw the line? Where do we stand when it comes to God's law and our conscience, which says that these things are sin and we should not tolerate them?
And we talked in a previous episode about the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, the idea that a lesser authority, local or city or county or state even, could refuse to enforce or uphold the law if they feel that it's unjust or immoral. Is this a case of that doctrine put into play in a different way?
You have to refresh my memory. Was this the county district attorney that came down with this ruling, or the sheriff?
This is the county district attorney.
Okay. So in that case, if the county district attorney isn't going to prosecute these cases, who is left to prosecute them?
Right.
I don't think there's any lesser magistrate below the county district attorney who could even lawfully prosecute petty theft crimes. But all this does is embolden those who engage in petty theft and have done so for years while being concerned about the legal ramifications. And now, since there's suddenly no more legal ramifications, what's to stop them?
Right. And while the intentions may be good and the idea that, hey, this will allow people who commit some of these minor crimes to more easily rehabilitate, it also encourages people not to straighten up because they know that certain things that they're doing, they're not going to get prosecuted for.
Right. And to bring back the example of New York, what else goes along with this? Maybe that, 40-something guy in the greasy wife beater who just grabbed a case of beer and is running out the door, let's not prosecute him. But what if he's also the same guy who is at home beating his wife? And what if you had bothered to prosecute it, you went to his home and found out that there is his wife beaten up on the floor?
Right.
It's, of course, let's not assume that that's the case. But if you're not going to prosecute these cases, how many more crimes are going to slip through the cracks, and how many more cases of justice not being rendered are we going to have?
All right. I think that covers that one. What have you got for us today?
Well, you took a story from your backyard, and I took a story from mine, something that happened in both Minnesota and in Wisconsin. And this was something that was a big enough story that it actually made international news. So this is dated from March 16th of 2019. Milwaukee, a child's body found wrapped in a blanket along a Minnesota highway is believed to be that of missing 2-year-old girl, whose mother police have said was shot and killed by her former pimp, authorities announced Saturday. The discovery of the child's body came hours after officials had put out a plea asking the entire nation to help find Noelani Robinson, whose father, Dariaz Higgins, is charged with killing her mother Monday in Milwaukee. Police have said the child could be anywhere because her parents have traveled through numerous states. An off-duty public works employee found the body that's believed to be Noelani's while driving home Friday night. The body was inside a blanket off the shoulder of Minnesota 218 north of Austin, about 300 miles west of Milwaukee. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension said in a statement Saturday night that Higgins had stayed at a hotel in Austin at some point in the last week. How and when the child died is not yet known. An autopsy has not yet been conducted. Well, it has now, and they say that the cause was blunt force trauma. But authorities believe the death did not occur in the last 24 hours and that the girl had been there for quite some time. Asked whether authorities believed Higgins was responsible for the child's death, Morales told reporters, "That's where the criminal investigation is shooting for. It's just too early to tell." Authorities have not disclosed the motive in the death of the girl's mother, 24-year-old Sierra Robinson. Police said Higgins was Robinson's pimp and they had been romantically involved but were no longer together. Robinson had left Noelani with Higgins when she moved to Las Vegas last month but wanted her back, authorities said. Higgins, 34, is accused of shooting and killing Robinson and wounding one of her friends. Police arrested him Wednesday, and prosecutors have charged him with first-degree intentional homicide. Online court records do not list an attorney who could comment on his behalf. The friend told police that Higgins had been living in Miami when he agreed to meet Robinson in Milwaukee to return Noelani to her. However, charging documents list a Milwaukee address for Higgins. According to the documents, Higgins, Robinson, and her friend spent time driving around together in Milwaukee doing drugs Monday before Higgins took them to an apartment building where he told them Noelani was. Authorities have not said whether they believe Noelani was there at that time. Prosecutors said Higgins shot Robinson and her friend when they got out of the car. An Amber Alert had been issued for Noelani but was canceled Saturday. Morales had suggested Friday that Noelani could be in the hands of human traffickers, but declined to provide details for why investigators believe that, other than to say, that's the world that these two individuals lived in, the victim and the suspect. And just to give you an update on that story, after some investigation, this was another news outlet had reported the timeline of what happened. And March 8th, Lipsy, which was an associate of Higgins, landed in Minneapolis. They had taken a flight from Las Vegas. Lipsy stayed in a motel while Higgins was gone all day. Higgins told Lipsy they needed to change motels and head back to Minneapolis. As they were putting their belongings in the vehicle Higgins had rented, Lipsy said Higgins took quote-unquote trash from his separate room and put it in the trunk. She said this wasn't unusual for them as they frequently have leftover drug evidence. During the drive, Higgins wanted to take a side road. The vehicle pulled over because Higgins said he needed to urinate. While pulled over, the vehicle became stuck in snow. Higgins was about to throw out the quote-unquote trash when another driver pulled up to help push the vehicle out of the snow. They pulled over again after a few miles, and Higgins, quote-unquote, threw out the trash after arriving in Minneapolis. Higgins then directed them to Rochester to get money. So, yes, he referred to disposing of the lifeless body of his 2-year-old daughter as, quote-unquote, taking out the trash.
Oh, that's a horrible story.
Yes. I mean, this guy basically graduated summa cum laude from Dirtbag University.
Yeah, no joke. So we've got a plethora of commandments involved here. As always, they start with the 9th or the 10th. In this case, the 10th, I guess. People who engage in prostitution, people who hire prostitutes. They have a covetous desire for sexual relations outside of marriage, which is a violation of the 6th. So that leads us into the 6th commandment. Then you have the couple here, right? They're not married.
No.
So they're engaged in a a relationship outside of marriage. So so there's the sixth commandment there.
Well, and it's, I'm going to sleep with you, and then other guys can pay me for you to sleep with them too.
Right, and I think that leads you into the fifth, because I think human trafficking and that kind of the prostitution pimp relationship. Well, we think of the fifth as being a prohibition against murder. At its core, it's a prohibition against harming your neighbor.
Right.
And human trafficking or pimping out your girlfriend is obviously harming them. And then, of course, the obvious, the murder of his girlfriend and the child.
You have Eighth Commandment issues because he has pled not guilty. And get this also speaks to this guy's character. For his first appearance in court, he had to be restrained to a wheelchair with a shock device attached to his leg. And
What?
Yes. And his attorney was complaining, saying that this was cruel and unusual punishment. And the judge said, after reviewing details from officers at the jail, this is a consequence of his behavior in jail. So, I mean, gosh.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then there's fourth commandment involved here, because you're talking about not the disrespect of your parents, but parents who who failed to be honorable, obviously, worthy of honor, because they so poorly treated their child.
Right.
And then ultimately, as we always say, all of these violations are a violation of the first, because through their behavior have desired things and behaved in ways that God didn't intend. So, wow, this is a Debbie Downer.
Yeah, and the last time that we had discussed doing Crime in the Ten Commandments, I had just seen that story, so I kind of kept it in the back of my mind. But, everything about this story, it's just heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And, if her mother would have made better choices, now granted, if her mother had made better choices, then maybe she wouldn't have been a mother, at least not with this dirtbag as the father.
Right, exactly.
From the sound of it, a lot of this was a consequence of becoming involved in the world of narcotic abuse, which narcotic abuse, when it comes down to it, is another quote-unquote fifth commandment issue. I shouldn't say quote-unquote. It is a fifth commandment issue because you're dealing with the intentional harm of your own body, and if you supply those narcotics to someone else, the harm of somebody else's body.
Yeah, that's a great point. This touches on quite a few things then, yeah. With the exception of, and I'm guessing they never went to church, so,
right.
So there's probably a third commandment thing in there too. So they covered the gamut in this one, and there's no mention of it in this, but one certainly would not put it past people who behave in this way, that they probably violated the seventh at some point in rolling tricks or stealing from people in order to fund a drug habit. Let's talk just briefly. Let's talk about this, because this sort of ties into the previous story, where the district attorney in Dallas is talking about not prosecuting people for minor drug crimes. And while on the one hand I'm sympathetic to this idea, and the idea that hey, what you do with your own body is in the case of drugs, while I wouldn't recommend it, and I don't think it's smart, and I think you're a loser if you do, it's your body, and I don't think the government should be necessarily involved in it, as long as that doesn't involve injury to other people.
Right.
But there comes a point where that injury or that use leads into things like this story.
Well, and when it comes to the use of narcotics, unless you are the one who is producing the narcotics and it's only for your own consumption, there are other people who are injured in the chain of events. Because if you are purchasing from a dealer, that purchase is used to fund the dealer's other criminal activity. It's used to supply the drug cartels that are manufacturing the drugs that are also involved in a plethora of horrific crimes. And
Plethora.
See, I have a plethora? Yes, boss, you have a plethora. And for those of you who do have no idea where that's from, shame on you. But yeah, and this is where I have, I do have some libertarian leanings, but when it comes to things like narcotics, that's where I'm torn. It's one thing if it's, a bit of marijuana here and there for recreational use. Mm-hmm. But there are so many people who smoke marijuana for recreational use that leads to harder drugs like meth and heroin. Mm-hmm. So, where do you draw the line? But yeah, if your position is, well, we're not going to prosecute these petty narcotic crimes, what might have happened if they had, and of course, right now we're playing, Monday morning quarterback, but, and I don't know what the policies are in Milwaukee when it comes to prosecuting quote unquote petty drug crimes. But if something like this were to happen, say in Dallas, where they pull this guy over and find him with enough marijuana that it's, actually under the limit of what they'll bother prosecuting, mm-hmm. Who's to know that if they bothered to prosecute that, they find this young woman who's trapped in prostitution. It's cases like this where you say, yeah, if they investigate the petty drug crimes, then maybe they find something else worse, and they can actually do some good in society. What could have benefited if, perhaps this young woman herself had been caught while she was soliciting and ends up having to come to Jesus moment and turning her life around. But if we're not going to prosecute those crimes, we're just letting these people fall further and further into depravity.
Right, and I think there's the danger of places like Nevada that where prostitution is legalized. The law kind of helps hide some of this sort of these sort of occurrences, where if that behavior is sanctioned by the law, and this person could have been picked up at some point, and I'm not saying this person, obviously in Milwaukee, I'm talking in generalities here,
right?
Not necessarily in this specific case, but we know that human trafficking is a huge problem in this country, and the idea that, well, it doesn't really hurt anybody. Like you said, there are bigger fish than just the person who's engaging in the activity at the ground level. There's more than just the prostitute. There's more than just the person who's using the drugs. There's a chain of people and events and money and influence that leads down to that person finding themselves in that situation. And if you're not going to prosecute or sanction those actions, then maybe, like you said, you don't find those things and stop the bigger networks of crime.
Well, one other aspect to this too is that we are a staunchly pro-life people. At least our brand of Lutherans are.
Right.
And this is something that has been on my mind for the last number of weeks, and it's kind of what was behind the impetus of part of my segment from last episode, that when it comes to being pro-life, the reason that this story made even international news was because of the daughter, because of the 2-year-old. Had it not been for that, this would have just been another dead hooker shot by her pimp. Mm-hmm. And so the problem that we have in our society, and this is where I think pro-life people need to stand up and be heard, is that we're not just pro-life for the unborn. We're pro-life for everyone. And I do want to say, yes, we do make an exception for capital punishment because there are some crimes that are so heinous that a person should not be permitted to have a place in society, whether it is behind bars or otherwise. But we're pro-life with this, where this young woman, her life had value in the eyes of the Creator. And so why do we so quickly dismiss a person's value because of the choices they make in life? And the issue here that we can put life behind all of this, that why do we want to oppose the use of narcotics? Because you're doing damage to your life and the lives of those around you. It's, and it just goes down from there. Why do we not want you to be prostituting yourself? Because you're causing psychological harm to yourself and you're putting your body at risk. It's, and take it to the next step, with abuse and all sorts of things, that life is precious and we should stand up for life. It would have been, think of how this could have turned out if someone in this young woman's life had stepped up and say, you are more valuable than this.
Right.
But sadly, that's not the case. And it's, yes, we can blame the dirtbag who did this, but we can also put the blame on society that turns a blind eye to people who make bad choices and says, well, you just have to live with that. That's your fault. Rather than saying, what can I do to help you out of this?
Yeah, I read a book recently, David Reichert's book about the Green River Killer, about his investigation into the Green River Killer. And it's interesting what you said just then, talking about because the reason that it took so long to find him, to find the killer, was because he preyed on the people that were most vulnerable and were also the ones that most people didn't want to see in society. And I think you're getting to an important point, because when we talk so much about being pro-life, we in this country tend to focus entirely on the womb. And what we have got to recognize is that being pro-life means you're pro-life from the womb all the way to death.
Right.
And so that means the care for the elderly, that means the care for the unborn, the newly born. So you're talking about young children, you're talking about teenagers. So when we talk about, a lot of times we see these stories about teenagers who are involved in gangs and drugs and violence and they get killed. And you see, like you were talking about in your recent pontification, about how we hear these stories about these kids who get killed involved in crime, and we say, yep, good riddance to bad rubbish, and we celebrate those things in a lot of cases. And what we should be doing is we should be mourning because we've lost another child, we've lost another teenager to bad choices and the lure of a life of crime that ultimately leads them to death, not just temporarily, but unfortunately, eternally.
Right. And, the wake of lives that are destroyed in the process behind that person's terrible and often criminal choices. And we need to also point out that being pro-gun is a pro-life position. Absolutely.
Now, when a lot of times people who are on the opposite side of the gun debate from us will try to pin on us the label of hypocrite by suggesting, well, you say you're pro-life, but you support gun rights. How can you do that? We support gun rights because we are pro-life, because we believe in the protection of life against those who would illegally take it and
Right.
immorally take it. So guns for us are not designed as life takers. They're designed as defensive tools. They're intended, like the fire extinguisher, to hopefully never be used. But if you need it in that moment when somebody kicks in the door and is going to harm you or your family, you really want to have it.
Right. Yeah. I carry my Glock 43 every day, not because I want to take life, but because I want to protect life.
Right. All right, I think that wraps it up. I've got a couple more. We'll save them for a future episode. Pastor, thank you so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun.
It was. I mean, despite the depressing nature of my story, it was much easier to be more jocular with yours. But, and I think that's just one of the stories that, because of the nature of it, you see the pictures of this beautiful little 2-year-old girl, and it just breaks my heart as a father that anyone could do such a horrific thing.
Well, and it for all the depressing nature of that story, it opened up some discussion of some important points that I think it was good for us to get into, and I appreciate you bringing it to us. And folks, if you have any questions or any comments about anything you heard here today, or if you have a suggestion for a story you'd like us to dissect in a future segment, be sure to visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Send us a voicemail or a voice message or an email, and we will read your story and discuss it in a future episode. Be sure to tune in next week. It'll be another of our variety show episodes. Sergeant Bill will be back with another tip. We'll have another tip from Mia and another pontification or rant from Pastor Bennett. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback, or a review on iTunes, and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.